Good evening. Welcome to everyone who is joining us through the magic of Zoom. We had over 200 people register for this event. It's a very important event for us. And each of you who is joining us is so very welcome, and we so appreciate your joining us. My name is Paul Gallay. I'm the Hudson Riverkeeper, and I will be your host for this extremely important program covering issues associated with PFAS chemicals with our three amazing guests. We're going to hear first from Rob Bilott, who is the famous attorney who became DuPont's worst nightmare and then was later the focal point of several films, which we'll be talking about in just a moment. After Rob speaks, Mark Ruffalo, who needs no introduction, but will receive one in any event, is going to talk about his experiences, both playing Rob in the film Dark Waters, which came out in November of 2019. And Ophra Wolf is going to speak on behalf of the Newburgh Clean Water Project. Each of these three speakers brings a different perspective to what is an extraordinarily concerning situation involving these per and polyfluoroalkyl compounds, so-called PFAS compounds. They'll tell you a little bit about the science, I imagine, some about the law, some about the community organizing necessary to protect us and our families from this extraordinary risk that until just 4 or 5 years ago, probably virtually nobody had heard of, and still far too few people understand. So without further ado, in order to maximize the amount of time we have for our amazing panel to speak, and then to maximize the amount of time you all have for questions, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I'll tell you in a little while how you can participate in the Q&A. We're going to hold questions until after all three speakers are done, but you can post your questions in the Q&A at any point. And unlike a lot of panels where folks will, have their questions squeezed into the last 5 minutes, we're gonna have at least a half hour for questions. So bring them, folks, bring them, please. Before I introduce Rob, I do wanna just say that one of the reasons we're here, I think the main reason is we all need everybody to be active on this PFAS chemicals, but we're also here because the Newburgh Clean Water Project is Riverkeeper's 2020 Hudson Hero Award winner, and Rob Bilott is our 2020 Big Fish Award winner. Mark Ruffalo was our 2013 Big Fish Award winner, and Participant Media, which produced and released the film Dark Waters that we're going to be discussing this evening, interesting, was our 2012 Big Fish Award winner. So we feel like we're in good company at Riverkeeper, and never so much as tonight when we have 200 of you joining us for these remarks. We hope you will join us again on September 15th when we hold our virtual Fisherman's Ball. Those words have never gone together before. We always get together on Chelsea Piers. There is a big advantage, and that is you can cut down on your carbon footprint. The tickets will be more affordable, which is nice, but we still want you to be there, even though it's going to be more virtual than anything else, so that we can really give honor to Newburgh Clean Water Project and to the work Rob Bilott has done for these 20 plus years. So on to the introduction for Rob. I warned you, Rob, this wouldn't take long. We were going to be coming to you pretty quickly. Rob Bilott, for nearly 30 years, has handled environmental issues involving regulatory compliance, permitting, and liability at the law firm of Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister. Rob gained international prominence by uncovering and disclosing the worldwide impact of environmental contamination by the forever chemicals known as PFAS. Rob has secured over $1 billion with a B, in damages for those adversely impacted by PFAS contamination. and he's been awarded the International Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, for his decades of work on this issue. Rob's story is chronicled in his book, Exposure, Poisoned Water, Corporate Greed, and One Lawyer's 20-Year Battle Against DuPont. And we should definitely find a way to get the link to that book up on our chat, because I've read it, I teach it, and it's an extremely important story for anybody who cares about these issues. And his story is the inspiration for the feature film we referred to a moment ago, Dark Waters, and the documentary, The Devil We Know. Rob has keynoted numerous conferences, testified before congressional subcommittees, the Parliament of the European Union, and committees of the United Nations. Our good fortune in having him speak to us and his willingness to be an honoree at this year's Fisherman's Ball is extraordinary. And it is my great pleasure to invite him to speak with you now. Rob, thanks so much. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul. You know, I really am honored to be able to be here tonight speaking with all of you. You know, this is just a tremendous honor to be involved with this organization, Riverkeeper, you know, helping to elevate the voices of the individuals and communities all across this country that are, you know, helping to bring stories out to the public and to the entire world about the serious environmental threats and threats to public health that we're all facing. You know, I was able to have the great fortune of running into one of these unique individuals about 22 years ago. His name was Wilbur Earl Tennant. I got a phone call one day in my office from Mr. Tennant complaining about cows dying on his property. And, you know, couldn't I help him? Nobody would talk to him about it. He was convinced there was a problem. He could see white foaming water coming out of the landfill next to his property. His cows were drinking this water and dropping dead. Wildlife in the area was getting sick, you know, but nobody would talk to him. Nobody would listen to him. And if I could just see what he was seeing, I certainly would agree there was a problem. So I invited him up, met with him. This was back in 1998. And that launched us down a path that we're still on today. It was during the work for Mr. Tennant that we found out there was a chemical in the landfill that the cows were drinking called PFOA, something I had never heard of, something we really couldn't find out anything about at the time. What was this stuff? And it was through years of litigation with the owner of the landfill, which happened to be the DuPont company, one of the world's largest chemical companies, that we found out this was a completely man-made toxin, had been invented right after World War II, had never been on the planet prior to the 1940s. But this chemical had been invented by 3M, DuPont had been buying it, and had been using it to make Teflon down along the Ohio River in West Virginia, just a couple miles away from where Mr. Tennant's cattle were grazing. And this landfill that Mr. Tennant was complaining about just happened to be receiving waste from that factory. And what we saw was this was a chemical that, although it had come out decades before the US EPA even existed, you have to keep in mind the US EPA didn't exist until 1970. Some of the first federal laws governing chemicals coming out into the market didn't even come out until 1976. Well, this chemical was already out there. And the way our laws work at the time, it was up to the companies using and releasing this chemical to notify the US EPA if the chemical was presenting a risk of harm or a threat to the public. And when I started pouring through all the documents we were getting in litigation from DuPont, what I was eventually seeing where there were decades of studies showing all kinds of toxic effects, animal studies, even human worker studies, showing various effects in different species, including even cancer in animal studies. The company itself even classifying this chemical as a confirmed animal carcinogen back in the 80s. And the company had even been sampling the water, the drinking water around the town, and had found this chemical in the drinking water of the community back in the 1980s. But because it was unregulated, essentially nobody knew. The company had decided really not to disclose information about the chemical to the regulators, to the public. And so through this case from Mr. Tennant, cattle farmer in West Virginia, we found out that we were dealing with a problem that went far beyond just one farmer, one family in West Virginia. This was a chemical that was contaminating the entire drinking water supply of tens of thousands of people in that community. And as we dug deeper in the documents, we found out the chemical was used not just there in West Virginia, but in various consumer products that have been used for decades. Stain-resistant carpeting, clothing, fast food wrappers and packaging, firefighting foams. And this chemical was one of an entire family of chemicals that we now call PFAS, P-F-A-S, per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, which is a real mouthful, but people now call them forever chemicals, because these man-made chemicals have a very unique ability to not break down in the environment. Once they get out there, they don't break down under natural conditions. So everything that gets released essentially stays out there forever. And these chemicals not only get out and stay in our environment, they have this very disturbing ability to get into us, into living things. And when they get into people, they stay in our blood and they build up to higher and higher quantities over time. So after Mr. Tennant brought this story to me, this case, we started finding out what was really going on here. This was something much bigger than one farm. We had to figure out a way to, how do we get this information out? How do we get this information to the regulators, to the scientific community? And we ended up sending a letter to the EPA in 2001, trying to warn them that this chemical was in drinking water of thousands of people and was likely all over the country. That led to the EPA finally beginning an investigation into this family of chemicals. And most importantly, the community found out, which led to class action, which we were eventually able to then resolve a couple years later. And then we had to struggle with the issue of, we now know this is in the water. We now know this has caused all kinds of toxic effects in the animals and the workers. What is it going to do to these people who've been drinking it for years and years and years? So we set up, we did something really nobody had done before. We set up this thing we called a science panel, where we took independent scientists and charged them with figuring out what would drinking this chemical over many years do to people in the long term. Nobody had really done that. We had no idea how long this would take. We ended up getting 69,000 people to participate, ended up being some of the most massive, comprehensive human health studies done on any chemical ever. Took 7 years. But at the end of that process in 2012, we ended up finding that this chemical was in fact linked with serious disease. It had 6 different diseases in humans, including 2 types of cancer. The very same things we had seen in the internal animal studies decades earlier. Once that science came out though, that finally was enough to trigger action by the regulatory agencies to finally go out and start sampling for this chemical across the country. And sure enough, we started seeing that it was being found all over the United States. But it was incredibly difficult to get this story out to the public and for the media or anybody to really report on it, to have it seen as anything other than a West Virginia problem. It was in 2016 that Nathaniel Rich authored an article that appeared in the New York Times Magazine that for the first time really kind of laid out the history of what we were dealing with here and explained how this was a problem that was affecting far beyond West Virginia. This was a nationwide problem. This chemical was being found in drinking water all over the country, including in New York State. That finally prompted the media to start reporting on this. More sampling occurred. The Department of Defense started going out and sampling around military bases and airports where these chemicals had been used in firefighting foams and sprayed out in the environment for years. And sure enough, from beginning about the end of 2016 over the next couple of years, almost every day, some new community within our country was finding out these chemicals were in their water, had likely been there for a long time, and were demanding, how do we get this out of our water? What's it going to do to us? And you know, there are all of these individuals within all these communities, like in Newburgh, that were finding out about this for the first time, even though this had likely been going on since the 60s and the 70s. We're then struggling with, what do we do about this? We want this out of our water. We want to make sure that we're protected. Yet they're being told essentially, as the community members, it's their burden to prove how these chemicals are causing them harm. They're the ones who have to pay to clean it out of their water. And so what we saw over the last couple of years are communities and states and water providers trying to find ways to deal with this emerging problem. And it really was to me, I view this as a massive public health threat. How do we get this information out to everyone? And fortunately, Mark Ruffalo saw that magazine article in 2016 and really was looking, and I'll let him tell you more of this story, but really saw this as an issue of why isn't this story being reported? Why isn't this story out there? Why aren't more people talking about this? This is a chemical that's in water all over the country, all over the world. It is now in the blood of virtually every living thing on the planet, yet nobody's talking about it. And he teamed up with the people of Participant in just a wonderful group, and they were able to bring this story out on the big screen through the movie Dark Waters and present it in a way to show what people like in Newburgh have to go through, communities when they learn about something like this, the contamination problem, the struggle they have to go through to get information out, to get action to be taken to protect them, to get this out of their water, to take steps to clean it up. So I really, am just incredibly grateful to Mark, the folks at Participant, for getting that story out in a broader way. And, for Mark, it went far beyond just the movie. He's gone to the European Union. We were able to talk to folks there about what needs to be done to address this on an international basis. He went to the US Congress to testify. So he has been incredibly active in helping to get this story out. And I really can't thank the folks that Mark's worked with, the Participant. I really am so grateful to the folks with the Riverkeeper and all of the supporters of the Riverkeeper that have been able to help elevate these issues, give people a voice, the people like in Newburgh, an ability to get these stories out and to get action to be taken. So really, thank you so much. And I've probably spoken way too long, but I appreciate, I cannot tell you how incredibly important it is, but to have stories like this elevated and to have the voices of these people in these communities be able to be heard. So thank you.
Well, the thanks are all ours, Rob. Your remarks are always amazing. You never speak too long. You always leave us wanting more. And we're really happy we'll have plenty of time for you and Ophra and Mark to answer questions. We're doing fine with time. And I'm going to introduce Mark Ruffalo now. Mark Ruffalo is an Academy Award, Golden Globe, BAFTA, and Emmy nominee, one of Hollywood's most sought after actors, easily moving between stage and screen. He has starred and performed in dozens of acclaimed films and shows, including his role as Bruce Banner, the Hulk, in Marvel Studios' Avengers franchise. Most recently, he portrayed Rob Bilott in Focus Features' Dark Waters. Much more about that soon. And an amazing program on HBO that my wife and I concluded over the weekend, known as I Know This Much Is True. Mark advocates for addressing climate change and in our increasing need for renewable energy. He received the Global Green Millennium Award for Environmental Leadership and the Mira Gandhi Giving Back Foundation Award. He has been named one of Time Magazine's People Who Mattered. As we said earlier, he received Riverkeeper's Big Fish Award in 2013 for his amazing work on the fracking issue. He helped launch the Solutions Project as part of his mission to share science, business, and culture that demonstrates the feasibility of renewable energy. And before I invite Mark to begin, I just want to say, Mark's an amazing fellow to work with. He rolls up his sleeves, he gets involved in the work, he helps guide it, and he helps follow the lead of communities. And there is no higher compliment in our business than that you follow the lead of communities. His work matters. I always love to see that Mark is in something because I know that means that whatever idiom it's working in, it's going to be amazing work. So again, without further ado, it is such a pleasure to introduce Mark Ruffalo.
Thank you. That was quite a humbling introduction. First of all, I want to thank Riverkeeper for putting this together and constantly keeping these issues front and foreground in your work. Secondly, to thank you for the work you did closing Indian Point. That was a massive undertaking, the nuclear power plant, and you guys were on the spearhead of that effort. I want to acknowledge the land that we're speaking from and the native ancestors. I've been asked by our indigenous community to remember to do land acknowledgement. So we're here from the ancestors' blessings. And then Rob Bilott. Rob, you know, I love you, man. I admire you so much. I read that article, and I couldn't believe that I was reading probably one of the biggest corporate crime acts in history in a supplemental of the New York Times, and the New York Times Magazine. And that it wasn't on the cover of every single major newspaper in the world, and coming out of the mouths of every politician and out of the mouths of every pundit. And what I was struck most by was your journey as a corporate defense attorney, which made it particularly interesting as a storyteller. In 2016, I decided I wanted to take the platform that I had as an actor and instead of, you know, using it to throw people like Oprah or Mark Favors or the Sautners or Craig Stevens or Ray Kimball, all the people that we need to hear from in the spotlight when it came onto me, I wanted to tell a story that would maybe get out into the public in a way that a newspaper article can't and a documentary can't. And this was one of the first things that came to my mind. And it's a story about this very humble man and who dedicated his life to this cause, not for ambition or for bread, or for the strut or trade of charms on the ivory stages, not for the money, but because it was the right thing to do. And it focused so squarely on the people who were being brutalized by it, and the community. And that was really appealing to me. And what I also started to feel about it was really the microcosm of a whole industry of pollution, whether you're talking about the fossil fuel industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry. It's usually the same play. Our regulatory systems have been gamed. Our politicians are in the pocket. The people who are supposed to be protecting us are looking the other way, or actually working on behalf of these industries. And I thought that this was the perfect symbol of a whole system that has betrayed the little guy just for a buck. And but I found in Rob Bilott such a humble and earnest and sincere man, the kind of hero that I want to be fighting for me today, who puts the people and the issue above everything else. And that was beautiful to me, and that was so antithetical to our ideas of what heroes are, these brash, loud, egotistical versions of heroism. And Rob was quiet, soft-spoken, and determined. And the story made a profound impact in the world. And I felt like that needed to be told. And we told it. And from that moment on, we began a campaign. And it was me and Rob and Todd Haynes and Participant Media and their incredible team who started the Fight Forever Chemicals campaign. And we went all over the United States. We went to Europe, and we used the movie as an organizing tool to educate lawmakers, to educate communities, to educate other activists and give them the chance to be able to tell the story, a very complex story, in a very kind of appealing and emotionally resonating way. And I think we've done a really nice job of educating people, and something shifted and we're moving in the right direction. And that's been really beautiful. I want to just talk about two last things before I wrap it up. And one of them is talking directly to the activists. From my own experience in the fracking community and fighting the fracking, we had to go against most of the major green organizations. We were doing it alone. And at some point, we decided that we had to ban fracking. And everyone said, "You're crazy, that's too radical." And we said, no, we have to have something that inspirational and that simple and that bold for people to understand and to hold on to and to feel that the fight that we're fighting is one that is significant and it catchy and determined. And so I would say to the folks fighting PFAS, be simple and bold and ask for everything you need. Don't let people split the middle or split you against the middle. Fight for what you know you have to do. And that's what energizes people. That's what energizes organizing. And so I saw it happen we were in North Carolina, and they were talking, well, maybe we just, talk about, discharge and I said, no, guys, you should be banning. You should ask for a ban. And they did. And it's moving now. And so I would say, be bold and have simple messaging that's bold. And lastly, we're looking at the world today through this lens of justice, and racial justice is so bound to these fights that we're having with the environment. And I am asking the environmental movement, which is predominantly run by white people, to start to make places all the way up onto your boards, onto your advisory committees, to bring the people of color into this conversation and to listen to them. We've done a lousy job in the environmental community of centering on these people. And I think the green community, the green orgs have got to step it up. They've got to really put their money where their mouth is. Lastly, I would say, I want to introduce the idea that as we are trying to build greater justice in the world, and the mood of the country and the world is toward greater justice, that we start to think about the rights of nature. We start to think about the rights of a river, the rights of a lake, the rights of a forest, the rights of animals, the rights of ecosystems. Because once we start to do that, it's not a matter of, oh, hey, you can't put a well 2,500 feet from a school. You can't put PFAS in a community's drinking water. Then we're talking about, you can't put PFAS anywhere. You can't put fracking fluid in any water system. I think that in the end would be the ultimate way that we stop this, to give nature the same kind of rights that we're talking about as human beings. And I want to leave you with that, because I know that's a pretty big step, but I do think that that's where we should be thinking about going as a movement, as well as making people of color, putting people of color in power positions in the green environmental organizations. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mark. There's nothing so powerful as truth like that, shared directly, shared with the confidence and experience that you've put together over years and years of advocacy. And we at Riverkeeper are working on it. We really are, very humbly and as quickly as we can. We're working on the rights of nature. We're working on the rights of Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. We're working on behalf of our board, our advisory boards, our staff, to make their work not only worthwhile, not only meaningful, but as satisfying and as easy to do as possible. And one of the reasons why we work so hard to achieve the truths that you're talking about is that those truths give us courage at times like this to believe that not only is all not lost, but all is in the process of being gained. I want to remind folks to put their questions in the Q&A. It'll be easier for me to find them and less risk that I'll lose them as I figure out which questions to address to the panelists. And now I want to introduce both the Newburgh Clean Water Project and Ophra Wolf, who will speak on behalf of the Newburgh Clean Water Project. So Newburgh Clean Water Project is a nonpartisan grassroots group of Newburgh residents whose mission is to protect the city's access to clean drinking water and engage the local and regional community in watershed protection and acts on behalf of the well-being of current and future generations. Newburgh Clean Water Project welcomes all who have been affected by the PFAS contamination from the Stewart Air National Guard Base. Newburgh Clean Water Project collaborates with a national network of frontline communities and institutions facing similar issues. Their goal is to hold our government and the PFAS manufacturers accountable, share resources, and create equitable solutions for our watersheds, ones that keep communities safe, climate resilient, healthy, and growing. And as I say, speaking on behalf of Newburgh Clean Water Project is Ophra Wolf. Ophra is a City of Newburgh resident for almost 6 years. She's initiated numerous cultural events and happenings in the City of Newburgh focused on health and empowerment, including Newburgh Open Movement and the Newburgh Suffrage Bike Parade and convening, which received support from the New York State Council on the Arts, Humanities, New York and Orange County Arts Council, among others. As a founding member of the Newburgh Clean Water Project, she has developed the innovative learning event methodology the group employs, helped spearhead the creation of the Stewart Air National Guard Restoration Advisory Council, and has become a knowledgeable presenter, a wonderful presenter, and a strong resource on Newburgh's water quality issues and potential solutions. Ophra Wolf, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Paul and Rob and Mark. This is a really big honor and opportunity for us to be witnessed at a very young moment, really, in our work, but a very powerful and meaningful moment for us here in this community. So for those of you who don't know anything about Newburgh, we're a small city about 60 miles north of New York City on the Hudson River. We were once known as the Queen of the Hudson, a real cultural center, also an industrial center. So there's a long history of industrial pollutants here. And with urban renewal in the 60s, the quality of life really started to deteriorate here very quickly. And at this moment of time, it's really an organized conglomeration of poor people, people of color, and others, many of us across the board who love the city, who love the incredible nature that surrounds us. And like Mark, thank you. I really want to say that one of the things that's given me hope as I've learned about what's happened to our land and our waters, which is horrifying, is the knowledge that the Lenape people who lived on this land before us knew how to care for it. And that the beauty that we still experience today comes from centuries of care. And that what's really missing right now is our care. all of our care. And that when a few of us in the community have brought our care together, we've really seen the ways in which we're able to move the dial. So a little history about the pollution, this particular PFAS pollution. It was very suddenly in the spring of 2016 that our city manager at that time, Michael Caravino, he's since left, called a state of emergency and immediately stopped using our water supply at Washington Lake and switched us to our secondary source, Brown's Pond. What had happened is that the EPA had actually come around for the second time to do a series of testing on emerging contaminants, what they call emerging contaminants, though through Rob we know that we've known about them for a while. And this was the second time that they were showing very elevated levels of PFOS in particular, over 150 parts per trillion. But the second time around, the EPA was just about to change its recommended MCL. It's still a recommendation, it's not a law. And MCL stands for maximum contaminant level, which had been at 200 up until that point. And all of a sudden it was going down to 70. And there was a lot of resistance, both from within the city council in the city of Newburgh and certainly from the state to the city manager just calling red flag, stop, this community will not be drinking this water anymore. And we're very, very, very fortunate that we have access to the Catskills Aqueduct. The Catskills Aqueduct, which serves New York City, happens to run very close to our secondary water source, Brown's Pond. And a very smart, forward-thinking water superintendent some years ago already, decades ago, decided to create a connection. I think that that's part of the really interesting story about Newburgh is that if you look at the way in which our water was engineered, it was at the peak of American, civilization and engineering. The ways in which they really followed the land and figured out how to connect the water to grow a reservoir that otherwise is only surface fed. And then it ends up being precisely these connections to these other streams that are coming from higher up from the base that are really polluting our water. And the whole system has been destroyed. So what we found out very quickly was that in our case, the plume of PFAS chemicals, and we're talking about more than PFAS right now because PFOS and PFOA are only two in a family of thousands and thousands of chemicals, many of which we can't even test for yet. And when we're talking about creating rules around this, we're talking about maximum contaminant levels, which is it's a big deal for us right now. That's something we're really fighting for. We should be looking at the combined level of all of these chemicals. What happened when the military stopped using firefighting foam with PFOS, which is a long chain PFAS, is they switched to a shorter chain PFAS. And so, there was action. There was action when the crisis was called. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened, but I'll also tell you that here we are 4 years into it, over 4 years into it, and nothing has actually changed. The toxins continue to flow downstream from the base as they were 4 years ago when the crisis was called. Zero care has come for this community. And what we understand is that people in this community were drinking these highly toxic chemicals in elevated quantities for over 30 years. And that's part of the reason that this is such a perfect moment to really look at this and understand the ways in which our institutions have failed us. Because the people of this community haven't mattered. They haven't mattered. And so if a little bit of poison goes down the hill, what's the big deal? And now we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and Newburgh has the biggest numbers of people infected and the highest mortality. It's very hard for us to draw the lines and say it's exactly this much because of the PFAS and this much because of the lead. And this much because of the air pollution. We have 2 times the asthma rate of the entire county, and they're talking about expanding the Dance Camera frack gas plant less than 5 miles up the river from us. So this is what environmental justice looks like. It looks like people getting really sick and dying more often. And I think that here in this community, we've been in the midst of a pandemic for a lot longer. So that when actions come, you know, it's not that we don't appreciate the efforts that are made. For example, the state came in right away, the state DOH and DEC, and they built a big GAC filtration system for Washington Lake, for our reservoir. And we're still being pressured to use it for Washington Lake. And there's 2 things that really we can't understand. Why should we be required to filter the pollution from the base? Right now, the gate from that stream into our reservoir is closed. And so there's not more PFAS coming through the surface water. We don't know if it's coming through the groundwater. That's another real issue. You know, for us to reopen that gate and restart to use our reservoir when the toxins are still coming down exactly as they have been is crazy, really. And the other part of it is that the system is not complete as it is. That what we understand is the GAC filters are really good at filtering out the long chain, the PFOS and the PFOAs. But the shorter chain chemicals, which have been switched to, are also in our water. And we need an ion resin element. And that's pretty simple. Actually, they can just plug it in, from what I understand from Wayne, our superintendent. But here we are 4 years into it, and that hasn't happened either. The Air National Guard did build an interim remediary filtration system at the biggest source of the outflow at Wreck Pond, where the stream flows over. And you know, they built a filtration system that failed in less than a month. And that if they had really read the reports from the DEC, when the DEC first came in 4 years ago to analyze what was going on with the water flow on the base, they would have known. It would have been clear that this filter would have been too small, because as an activist, I sat in on a meeting where I heard that. You know, and so the lack of communication between the government agencies, the total lack of urgency, right? Like, people are suffering, and they're suffering quietly, and they don't know exactly what they're suffering from. But we know that PFAS chemicals are endocrine disruptors. We know they really weigh on our immune system. And here we are in a pandemic, and in a moment where, you know, we're really asking, you know, what are all the ways in which we have to start saying, with our actions, with our institutions, Black lives matter. Brown lives matter. The lives of all people matter. And the water is such an incredible teacher, because, you know, that water is now the neighboring towns, the town of New Windsor and the town of Newburgh, both of which have a very different cultural composition, are far more affluent, have really, you know, done a lot actually to damage our watershed for the good of their tax base with development. It's in their wells now too. The water doesn't know the boundaries. It doesn't know the lines we draw. And that's the lesson that we have to learn. You know, it's really time for us to care. What I can say, you know, if I were to give any advice is to get out there and learn how to work together. And it can be really hard. You know, it can really challenge us in all kinds of deeply vulnerable ways, because we all want to do good. But we have to learn how to listen to each other. We have to learn how to honor each other's strengths. And we really have to learn how to take care of each other first. I think that's been a huge part of the culture of our group that has kept us really growing and doing this work, is that we decided early on is that what matters is that each one of us was taken care of. And if someone needs to step away to take a break, someone else will pick up the baton. Yeah, I think that's what I'll leave people with for now. Thank you.
Ophra, thank you. Thank you all of our panelists. We have 14 questions already, which is no surprise to me, and it makes me very happy. I'm going to skip the questions that I would normally have the prerogative of asking, and I think that may be one thing that folks like me can do more of, which is to just move straight to the voices of the people who have taken time to be part of this discussion. I'm going to read an offer to Rob, which is not really a question. It's an offer from Craig Stevens, who Mark and I have worked extensively with. Thank you for your amazing work on PFAS and PFOS in the book and the movie. We would like to invite you to Dimock, Pennsylvania in Susquehanna County, as we've just had a huge win against fracking in Pennsylvania, and we're honored to have you see it firsthand and teach us more about your fight and how we can get our own message out. And they stand with you. And so, Rob, I'll make sure to connect you with Craig after this event. Catherine Waters has a very open-ended question, which folks can answer in any way they see fit, because it's a great open question. How can she help? How can the 110 people who are on this call help, besides just donating money? And before I throw it open to others to answer, here's something about donating money. When Riverkeeper gave its statement, Black Lives Matter to Riverkeeper, we asked people to donate money, not to Riverkeeper, but to 3 of our partners in the environmental justice movement, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, We Act, and the Sanctuary for Independent Media. And sometime between now and the end of the program, we'll put those those website addresses back up in the chat. Please familiarize yourself with the work of others and donate to organizations that are really scrapping. We're scrapping too. We're not a rich organization. And we have to keep a 30-person team together, which is a challenge. But donate broadly. Donate to Riverkeeper, but donate to groups that are on the front lines, that are environmental justice organizations. We are an ally organization. So one thing you can do is, how can you help besides just donating money? Donate broadly. And now, my fellow panelists, how can folks like Catherine help?
I can jump in. As Mark mentioned, there was a great coalition formed with the release of the movie with Dark Waters called Fight Forever Chemicals, where different organizations, different groups across the country that have been active on PFAS issues in particular have tried to get together and at least make information available to folks who are looking for ways to help, or if they're looking for information. For example, what kind of products have these chemicals been used in? What companies are moving away from them? What different groups are involved? So, people can be like Wilbur Tennant or Joe Kiger, who you see in the movie, people in the community who are able to stand up and speak out and say, this is what needs to be done. I'm here ready to help do it. Hopefully, people will find those resources helpful, and there are a variety of organizations all across the country, like Riverkeeper as well, that are there to help people who are looking for ways to amplify their voice.
I'd add also, we've seen a lot of studies on this, and just peer-to-peer sharing of information is really powerful. Talk to your families. There's a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but you tell somebody, hey, have you what's in your drinking water? To bring those kinds of questions forward might be uncomfortable, but they do begin to create critical mass. And once people start to understand the reality, then they start to take action. They make their votes count. They ask questions. They change their behavior. And so there's a lot you can do just within your peer-to-peer network. Then there's Environmental Working Group, which is just a wealth of information on this issue. And so educating yourself by finding out what groups are creating the data, and learning about it, and then following their lead. And finally, your spending dollars. I mean, I hate to say it, but corporations change their behavior based on how we're spending. And if you go to EWG, you'll see there's a list of corporations that are still using PFAS. And I would suggest that you stop buying from them and start buying from people who don't use it, who have made commitments not to use it. Those are just a few things that you can do that aren't just donating money, and that are active, and that I think are powerful.
And I'll jump back in real quick and say, you know, just as you see in the movie, I mean, you realize, you know, when we turn the tap on, you can't just assume somebody's there watching for you and somebody's taking care of it for you. You know, everybody, I think, assumes we're in the United States. We have, obviously our water must be just perfectly fine. There are people out taking care of all this and handling all of it for us. You know, not necessarily the case. You have to ask the questions. You have to look for the information. And as Mark says, when you find the information, help get it out to whoever you're talking with, whoever you're meeting with, may either be family or colleagues at work, but don't just assume somebody else is doing it for you.
I'm going to jump in and, you know, we have actually a long specific list of actions that we can share, and I'm really embarrassed that I don't have them all written down, but I forgot to thank my fellow steering committee members who are going to come through and really help with this. So Mary Wagner in particular created an incredible website for us. And that is one of these repositories for information where you can find out about a lot of actions that are going on right now, things that you can sign on to, where you can educate yourself about what's going on. And I also just want to give a big shout out to Deborah Brown, who was the first one to really bring us together, Tamsin Hollow, who just puts out such beautiful words for us on the web, and Marcel Barrick, who's our environmental scientist and keeps us looking at things straight. I you know, think that one of the big things that we're up against right now is, like I said, the MCLs, the maximum contaminant levels, which the recommendations from the New York Water Quality Council were given almost a year and a half ago, actually, to set the levels at 10 parts per trillion each for PFOS and PFOA. So that would be 20 parts per trillion combined as the lowest contaminant level that would be allowed in our waters. And there are, first of all, plenty of studies, recent studies, particularly one by the NRDC, that shows that, you know, right now non-detect is around 2 parts per trillion, and that's what we should be aiming for, non-detect. And as the technology gets better, the filtration needs to get better too. If we can detect these chemicals in our water, it is too much. It's affecting our health. And you know, actually the clock runs out on New York actually passing these MCLs, which at the time were considered quite low, you know, 10 parts per trillion. But like I said, the reality of the science is that they're not nearly low enough. And the clock runs out on July 30th. If the state doesn't finally pass them on July 30th, then we have to start the whole process over again. Now, in some ways, that might be good for us, because then we're really going to push for the non-detect. We're really going to push for the 2 parts per trillion. And what would be helpful for us is if you would be willing to write a letter to the Department of Health and say it's not too late to make the right levels right from the get-go. What I'm learning as I get into this work is that, you know, once legislation exists, it's very hard to change it. So let's get it right at the beginning. The other reason why this is incredibly important for our community is because there's quite a bit of contention between the state agencies and the Department of Defense and the ANG about who should really take responsibility for all the toxins that have been let out and that we've drunk. And this particular, you know, passing the hot potato is delaying things, and one of the things that is delaying it is that the Stewart ANG and the Department of Defense is not legally obligated to clean up to any standard beyond what CERCLA, which is part of the Clean Water Act, states. Right now, it's still 70 parts per trillion from the EPA, but they will meet a state's promulgated standards. At least that's what they've said in our case. And so if the state promulgates even the standard of 20 parts per trillion combined, we're already in a much better place than the 70 parts per trillion, which is all they're obligated to right now. And obviously what we really need is we need to bring those MCLs down to 2 parts per trillion. So anyone who's willing to call, to write, there is information about that on our website, which is newburghcleanwaterproject.org. That would be a really wonderful and meaningful action for us. And I think to answer the question more generally from a very personal perspective, I think something you can do is show up to those really boring meetings and show up like with your entire body, with your entire being, and listen with every cell in your body. You will hear the moments when you're being lied to. And when we are able to show up like that, you know, it's a little scary, right? You want to believe that the authorities are telling you the truth and that, like, you know, Rob said, someone's going to do something. And it's enraging when you start to really hear it and see and understand, you know, what's going on. But that is what turns the tide. I feel like our willingness to be present, to look it in the eye, to see it for what it is, and to say enough. There are ways to stop this and to fix what we've done as best as possible.
Wonderful. We have 24 questions, and I'm super glad that we gave the majority of the time for questions. I know we're not going to get to all of the questions, and for those of you who are posting questions now, we'll do our best to get written answers afterwards. This is really good, and many of the questions have to do with environmental justice and addressing environmental injustice and environmental racism. And one of the answers that we will give to a question, what can groups like ours do in order to reduce environmental injustice, is to make sure community voices are centered, make sure community voices have the opportunity to create dialogues that the government may not give them the opportunity to do. The idea of created spaces is something that I have seen powerfully change the course of environmental issues on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis. So create spaces where community voices are centered and where communities gain purchase and traction over a situation that otherwise would be done to them. And it'll give communities, as Ophra has just said, give communities an opportunity to control the dialogue and control what happens in their locality. So we have a question from my wonderful colleague, the Executive Director of Clearwater, Greg Williams, and it is for Rob Bilott. Rob, I understand that both military and civilian airports in Europe have found alternatives to firefighting foam containing PFAS. Can you confirm that and describe the obstacles to adopting PFAS-free firefighting foam in the US?
Well, thanks for the question. That is something that has certainly become a hot issue lately, particularly as the scope of contamination is being found that outside military bases and airports. A lot of what is being linked to firefighting foam use. And there have been folks that have been making available alternative firefighting foams for quite some time. There are places that have used it overseas, I know, for many years. Yet there is still a big debate here in the US about how extensive that we can use these other foams. In fact, there's the argument being made by the Department of Defense and others that the military specifications require a certain type of foam to continue to be used. And so there's now legislation that's being proposed, some of which is passed in certain states, that are trying to get rid of those older requirements that you continue to use the PFAS-based foams. Yet there are a number of companies that are trying to bring these alternatives out into the market to try to get them more widely used in the United States. To date, they have been seeing more use, frankly, overseas than they are here because of this historic problem with having them being required, the old PFAS foams being required under various different types of rules and regulations that are slowly but surely starting to get removed.
So a question now from our attendee, let's see, question is from John Clark. Why doesn't what happened in dark waters in West Virginia and the Ohio River Valley force the hand of the government here in Newburgh?
Rob Bilott.
Well, I guess that I'm really hoping that as more people see this story and see dark waters, that they will see that things can be changed, and local communities like in Newburgh, can come together, come forward, say, look, we're not going to tolerate having these chemicals in our water, and we're going to insist that they be filtered out and removed, and that appropriate standards be set. We, I think, asked the US EPA to start the process to set drinking water standards for this chemical, just one of them, PFOA. In 2001, 19 years ago, and as we still sit here today, there is still not, as you heard from Ophra, there's still not a federally enforceable drinking water standard for any of these PFAS chemicals, which is why states like New York are moving forward to try to set their own standards to help protect folks. The states are having to take the lead on this. Water providers are having to go ahead and put in water filtration systems, incur millions and millions of dollars to deal with this. But hopefully, as more and more people see that this is a problem, we're going to see this action being taken. If it's not going to happen on the federal level, states are going to do it. Local communities are going to do it. The people are demanding that this be taken care of and be filtered out of our water now, and that steps be taken to make sure that our kids and our next generations to come aren't continuing to be born with these chemicals in their blood.
I have something to maybe offer there without any technical knowledge precisely. But first, I want to give a big, huge shout out to Jennifer Rollison, another board member who I forgot to mention, and who's a lifelong resident of the city of Newburgh. She's seen a lot of these things unfold and has been affected herself. One of the biggest problems we have in our watershed is that actually our entire watershed is outside of our city boundaries. And in New York State, home rule makes it so that the neighboring municipalities can choose how they develop their land. And I learned a lot from seeing how our water was destroyed for the sake of development, about some of the things that underlie our very systems of government that are really rotten. And the problem is that at the end of the day, profit and development are what matters. Not nature, not people. Certain people matter more than others, and it's really mind-boggling. Actually the folks on the Air National Guard base, right? The Air National are some of the most affected. They're some of the most affected. You'd think that the military would immediately take care of its own. But that's not how it works. What our government has been set up to do for a long time, and we need to look at this, is to take care of profit. And until we are able to fundamentally change that, it's going to be very, very hard to stop, all the little passing the hot potato and pussyfooting and trying to really bore us to death and dry us out so that we forget about the issue. That's my...
It's a great observation. I spent 10 years working for the New York State DEC in the 1990s, and I observed it firsthand. Interestingly, when I was working at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, every once in a while I would take a call from Hudson River Fishermen's Association, which is the predecessor for Riverkeeper. And at the time, the chief investigating attorney for Riverkeeper is a fellow, some of you may have heard his name, Basil Sagos. And so Basil understands what it's like to be an advocate, and I understand what it's like to work in government. And personally, I think that it is essential that there is that understanding, but that you use that understanding and that you don't pussyfoot, whether you're on one side or the other. There's only one truth. It's not a government truth. It's not a community truth. It's not a nonprofit truth. And if you're not going to keep to that truth, and I'll come back to the comments Mark made earlier, these are truths, and truths need to be honored. A question along these lines from Megan Lung. Thank you so much, Mark, for bringing up the lack of representation or diversity in the environmental field at all levels. Could the rest of the panel share any concrete recommendations for all the organizations present today? What can we do now, and what does our field look like in 5 years?
I could talk a little bit about what we did at Solutions Project. We saw this kind of coming a few years ago. We were doing a lot of work in impacted communities, and we found out that many of them were BIPOC communities, and many of the innovations that were happening from women of color. And also predominantly they were the most affected. So what we did is we changed our grant making to include 80% of all of our grants going out the door to be to women of color. Then we immediately began to change the makeup of our board, bringing in BIPOC people, and we just made our executive director a woman of color. And it's these kinds of moves where you are actually sharing power and resources. That's where I think it really matters and counts. And stepping back, giving up some of your power. And when you do that, you realize quickly that you haven't really given up anything at all. You just have created a greater pool of wisdom. And you're better able to put your resources where they actually can do the most good.
So I don't see my fellow panelists coming off mute, which is always what I look for to make sure that I'm not jumping in. Oprah, I think you are off mute, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think I would be remiss not to try to answer this question. And just to say that it's hard, and that's okay. That's where we're at right now, and I think it just goes back to what I said earlier. Like, if you can find the real joy in learning and in all of this, there's a big learning curve we're all being asked to make right now to understand what we're up against, what our children are up against, what the generations ahead of what we've set them up for, and there's also a possibility of a real sense of joy and celebration of how much growth is possible, and how many times your mind can be blown, and how many times you can be completely wrong and maybe be a little bit of an asshole and it still be okay. I think that it's just, it has to come from a desire right now to, for it to be urgent enough for us to just try, talk to people we don't know how to talk to, invite them in, get it wrong, do it again, until we really learn from one another.
Thank you, Ophra. I'm going to just say one last thing. I mentioned the two most important things. Help get funds into the hands of environmental justice organizations and center community voices, not just so that they're in the record, which is agency speak for you can't blame me for not listening. In the record only counts for so much. Community voices need to actually carry the day. They need to be addressed. They need to be treated as the most serious and the most demanding of attention of all of the voices. And so that's why we crafted a written statement of organizational values for the first time, which may sound a little bit, bureaucratic, but, surprisingly, you write these things down and you read them again and again and again, and you start to live them better. So we now have an organizational value that access to clean drinking water is a human right. We have an organizational value that seeks a reduction of environmental harms, especially for disproportionately impacted communities. Trust, respect, integrity, and justice as the basis for our relationships, both within and beyond our organization, and environmental and recreational benefits for all. And one of the newest cases that we've agreed to take on is to try to improve recreational access for Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. Write these things down and then live them is one of the things that we can do. We have a couple of more technical questions that I'm going to give, and we've got now 27 questions. I think we've answered 4 or 5 of them, so we're really going to have to do that written record afterwards. This is from Lawrence Smith. I heard that the new filter that was installed for Newburgh has not been working since December of 2019. Why? And if that's true, why hasn't the community of Newburgh been notified that the filter is down and not working? So I think, Ophra, you are probably best situated to address that question.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Well, and you have unwittingly picked up on one of the things that makes this particular cause so challenging, which is it's complicated, it's complex. And so actually there's 2 different filtration systems in question. There's the filtration system that the state DEC and DOH built for Newburgh at Newburgh's Water Treatment Center, which is a GAC filtration system, a granulated active carbon filtration system. There is another much smaller filtration system, which is a temporary system. It's on lease. There are consultants that have been hired by the ANG. I'm sure they're getting paid a lot of money to figure out how to put a filter at the outfall from Wreck Pond, which is where most of the PFAS pollution is coming into our waters. That filter failed entirely. And the reason that it failed is because it wasn't built to actually calculate for rain events. That's one of the reasons. So every time it rains, which is quite often here, the filter overflows. It also had all kinds of other problems. There was sediment that was blocking it up. There was maybe something, I think it was dirtying it, or something was growing inside of it. And so that filter was only online for a month, or maybe less than a month. And now they have to go for some kind of redesign. And this is another thing that we could really use community voice and pressure on, is what we learned with the help of the very incredible Dan Shapley of Riverkeeper, who's really been just the, a shining star for us, and a guiding light in navigating all of this. There's a 2-year agreement, a DSAMOA, between the DOD and state memorandum of agreement that ran out 2 years ago. And nothing happened in these 2 years that's meaningful in any way. They need to write another 2-year agreement. We really, really are asking the community and everyone to pressure them, make it real. Put in a filter that works, build it to capacity. Like I said, there was information already years ago that it would be very hard to build a filtration system at this site because of rain flow. They went ahead and spent over $2 million building a filtration system and zero care for the community. Zero care in that time for the community. So that's the filter that's not working. Our filter is working, and it's filtering out water from Brown's Pond when we get water from our secondary source. We're only getting water from Brown's Pond when the Catskills aqueduct is closed for cleaning or repair. And so there are usually a couple months of the year that we're drinking from Brown's Pond, which has very low levels of PFAS, but it has been found in that water as well. So that's being filtered out entirely by the GAC filter. What we are not agreeing to as community advocates is to start using that filter to actually filter Washington Lake water, that we go back to drinking our very contaminated water without the proper filtration system. So we need the ion resin exchange elements. And before the military has even stopped the toxins from coming down the hill, it's just unfathomable that the community or the state in lieu of the community should be cleaning up the pollution caused by the military. I don't think there should be a question about whose responsibility the cleanup is.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Ingrid Siedenstricker. For all panelists, any advice for aspiring environmental lawyers? Thoughts on the best ways to leverage power in an effort to achieve environmental justice?
Well, I'll jump in as the, I think all we can do is say, I encourage all young lawyers, if they want to jump into the environmental world, we need you. And you never know where your career is going to take you. And it doesn't necessarily matter where you're starting off, and whether you're at a big law firm like where I started, or an environmental group, or with the state government or the federal government, with an NGO. Use your skills to help your clients in the best way you can, and you never know where that path's going to lead you. I had no idea 22 years ago that I would be heading down the path I headed down, where we're now dealing with the PFAS issue, on an international contamination basis. So as long as you're able to use those skills to wherever you end up, you don't necessarily have to be in any particular location to help the environment. And in fact, you can do a lot of good and a lot of help, frankly, whether you're at the state, federal government, or on the corporate side, helping folks understand what needs to be done.
Any thoughts from Mark or from Ophra in response to that question? I've been an environmental lawyer for 30 years, but Rob's already said all the good stuff. Maybe a non-lawyer is the best to answer this question.
I have a thought. And it actually goes back to what Mark was saying earlier, which is really looking at the rights of the land and the rights of the water. And I think of maybe a simple and more immediate place to start based on what we see here in Newburgh is protection of watersheds, that development and profit does not come before the quality of our drinking water. And that any development that already exists that threatens watersheds needs to take some kind of remediation action. Permeable pavements for the Walmart across the street from our water. It's not all that complicated. These are the kinds of legislation that we're really missing right now. We don't have any legal tools that are really real and handy for us right now to say, we can protect our water. We cannot protect our water.
So another question, which is really nicely set up by Ophra's last answer. Racism is an environmental issue. Can you clarify the connection between the rights of rivers and the rights of people of color, and what role activists can play?
Well, look at who's at the bottom of the totem pole. People of color and poor people and the environment. They are the last ones to be considered. And so they are deeply intertwined with each other. If we take care of the bottom of the totem pole, the rest of the totem pole is covered. And right now, the whole system is topsy-turvy. We have corporations, politicians that have captured, our regulatory system, and basic white supremacy. I mean, just what it is. But that trickles down, and we all are affected by it. And so if you take care of the people on the front lines, which has been my battle cry for the last 7 years, I would say, lift them up, listen to their innovations, adapt them, then the rest of the problems take care of themselves. And that would include the idea that that nature itself is not a dump. It's not a place that that we can constantly take from and abuse without it affecting all of us. And I think those two ideas go hand in hand quite elegantly.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to invite our three panelists to offer some closing thoughts. And 95 people are hanging in there for the second, the last 20 minutes of this session. It's pretty impressive. We will get other questions that have not been answered to the best of our ability, put up some sort of a summary in response after the event. But we're in an election year that is extraordinary. It's frightening. It's empowering. The stakes could not be higher. We have issues associated with action on PFAS chemicals. We have issues associated with rollback of environmental regulations. Riverkeeper joined the Center for Biological Diversity and the Waterkeeper Alliance in giving notice that we were going to sue the Trump administration in August for failing to enforce the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act on the flimsy pretext that companies could not possibly comply with environmental laws and satisfy their obligations under the period of COVID-19. And we just learned today that the Trump administration has decided not to go forward with this new approach as of the day we could bring the suit, essentially. And that's very exciting. So you can make a difference with litigation. You can make a difference with organizing. But how do we all make a difference with politics? What do our panelists feel in a nonpartisan, non-electioneering, because we're a nonprofit and we can't electioneer, but how can we use the political process to make change on these issues?
I'm going to jump in because I think that for us, there's something that's right in front of us, and that's the New York Health Act. And the thing that is without question right now is that people need health care. People have been hurt, people have been poisoned, and universal health care is entirely within reach for us and deeply, deeply necessary. I mean, if we were really to start doing the math on what it would cost the state or the military or the federal government to go and start offering care, just community by community, affected community by affected community, it wouldn't be nearly as effective, and also a way of speaking to the people that somebody cares for them. And if they need care, they can receive it. And I think that for us as a steering committee, that's really front and center right now. Some way to know that the people that we love and care for in this community are getting the care that they need, whether they can afford a private healthcare policy or not. We all deserve healthcare.
I guess I will jump in and just say, one of what we've been talking about today, PFAS, chemical contamination, really is nonpartisan. I mean, this is something that affects everyone. It doesn't matter what your political views are, whether you're, blue, red, whatever color you identify with. I mean, this is contamination that's affecting everyone, everywhere. And, even when we're right now in the midst of a pandemic, and to me, it's just amazing, that the connection even between PFAS and the pandemic is not getting discussed as much as, frankly, I think it should, which is there, an actual connection here? You're talking about chemicals that are in everyone's blood and everyone's water right now, while we're all facing a pandemic, that have the ability to decrease our immune system, impair our immune response, decrease the effectiveness of vaccines. Yet here we've got this stuff in our water, in our blood, that these companies have put there knowingly that it was going to go out there. and there's really nobody talking about it. I was encouraged to see, I think it was just yesterday, there was a letter sent by a number of senators asking for the ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, to at least look into this, and at least elevate this issue. Because again, I think it doesn't matter what political side you're on. This is something that affects all of us, and everyone should be speaking out, using this opportunity to say, this is something we all share. It's a problem for everyone. It's not a political issue, and it's something we can all, frankly, rally around and make some real change. As Mark indicated, and others have talked about, I mean, there's legislation out there right now. There are people trying to get things done to address this. Finally, after decades of it being covered up, rushed under the rug, these discussions are finally happening. Now's the time, I think, that we finally can move things over the finish line. I think I would hope that everybody can come together regardless of their political views on this. Thanks.
I would say, find out the candidates that are fighting for these issues and vote for them, and work for them, and give them money, and if they're not, and you're interested in them, then push them. There's plenty of people all from all stripes of the political aisle that get this, and they're doing the right thing. Like Rob said, it is not a political issue. There's no one out there that wants to poison their own children. I hope. The idea is that somehow there's going to be certain groups of people who don't have to deal with this. But the fact of the matter is, it's in all of us, like Rob said. It's in every single living creature on the planet. It is not a question of politics. But I'll tell you, if there's a politician that's not willing to make DuPont pay for this shit, to make DuPont and these companies pay for the poison that they knowingly put into all of us against our will, without our knowledge, then that person should not be an elected official. And it's as simple as that.
It really is as simple as that. I think that's a theme this evening. And again, I'm going to ask everybody to offer a final minute's worth of observations. I think that so many of the things that people in the past have said, well, we can't do anything about that. The government has that controlled. We're not saying that anymore. And we're seeing that the government controls only what we let them. The laws are the laws. The laws and what's right at a fundamental level should control what happens to us all. So I'm going to ask in reverse order from the last answers, Mark, then Rob, then Ophra, to bring us home, please.
I'm going to cede my time to the other panelists because they're so eloquent and beautiful.
Well, again, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Mark and Ophra and Paul for providing this forum to talk about this. I really think, if anything, this situation with PFAS, what we've all been talking about, the same issue we're all dealing with here, really, I hope, provides a great example of how even one individual, somebody like Wilbur Tennant out in West Virginia, can stand up, make his voice heard, and create an avalanche of change. Communities getting together, like the community in West Virginia, 69,000 people got together, neighbors and people who all maybe had different political views, but they all got together and they all saw this as a common threat, a common challenge. And they got together and they changed the world. We were able to get science done that nobody thought could ever be done. We were able to meet a burden in the legal system that nobody thought anybody could ever meet to prove this chemical contamination. That one of the first times in history, that a community was able to actually do that and prevail in court, and be able to use the legal system, which unfortunately was one of the only tools left available, for communities and individuals to get this stuff out of the water, to get the science done, to get the change made, to protect themselves and to be able to do it. And I'm hoping people are inspired by this to know it's doable. And yes, we now realize this is a national problem, an international problem. But the more people talk about it, the more folks like all of you and everybody listening, you know, that is willing to talk about this issue, willing to take it on themselves, to talk to others about it, demand the change ought to be made, things will change. And you know, it may take a long time. It's we can look at this as an example, but it happens. You know, the truth comes out. People see the facts, they see the truth, and change happens. And so I think it's just incredibly encouraging, inspiring, and I really appreciate everybody providing the opportunity to highlight what these folks in this community did and what the people still in places like Newburgh and organizations like Riverkeeper and people like Mark and Participant that are out there working to help educate the rest of us and to make sure this gets done. Thank you all. Thanks.
Wonderful. Ophra.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, for all that you've done to pave a path for so many of us. I want to keep going with thank yous, and I just want to say again that, you know, I have the privilege of being here among all of you and being inspired as a representative of a team. And it's really been our courage and our willingness to learn how to work as a team and to prioritize that, to prioritize our own good relations and our own good health that has made it possible for us to do this work, because we're perfectly clear on the fact that this is a long-term project and we need to learn how to care for ourselves and for each other on the way. And that's how we will teach our governments how we need to be cared for. First of all, by doing it between ourselves. So I want to thank Jennifer again, and Mary, and Deborah, and Tamsin, and Marcel. And if I can, I'll say one last thing, because when the question came up a moment ago about the relationship between what's going on with the environment and the situation of Black people in this country, I immediately got an image of one of my neighbors, Antoinette, and her beautiful, beautiful girls, Nyangel and Nigea, her sister Thomasina, and her son Bam Bam. These are friends of ours on Du Bois Street in Newburgh. And man, the mothers in this community, the way they love their kids and mother them through some incredible, incredible challenges and in environments that are very, very, very difficult to raise kids in, are just a massive inspiration. And I think it's about really, we need to learn how to cherish and protect and stand up for motherhood. And if the mothers in this communities need help, whatever that is going to be where our money is really best spent, you know, and that is how we are going to see ourselves turn into a culture, I believe, this is my personal opinion, very quickly, within a generation or two, that knows how to take care of the environment and knows how to take care of the land.
So I have to go way back in my memory to remember an evening that was as special as this one has been. I too have some thanks that I want to offer. I want to start by thanking our panelists, Ophra Wolf, Mark Ruffalo, and Rob Bilott. You really give meaning to the notion that if you commit yourself to good work and do it thoughtfully and do it courageously, you change hearts and you change minds and you change the course of history. You ban fracking, you make 70,000 people get health testing and screening. You demonstrate connections between chemicals and health risks that people have previously just had to be suspicious about. I want to thank our panelists. I also want to thank my 30 colleagues at Riverkeeper for their own commitment to this work, their own extraordinary achievements. I want to thank our members and our other donors, our volunteer leaders on our board, advisory board, our Young Advocates Council, our Leadership Council, and our Corporate Stewardship Council. We have over 80 volunteer leaders who help keep our organization going and are pushing us, I think, in the right direction in a number of ways. Please come back on September 15th. Tickets are not on sale yet, but they will be much more affordable this year. The food won't be as good, but the tickets will be more affordable. The community will be so much better because we'll have a big group of people who really, really care about these issues and are thrilled to be with us. It's September 15th. The theme is a Hudson River Rising. And it's kind of, I thought it was a double entendre, but now I think it's a triple entendre. Obviously, we're worried about the Hudson River rising. We've got to deal with climate change and sea level rise. We're excited about the level of community activism that's rising. And let's treat the Fisherman's Ball on September 15th as a little river rising all of its own, and see what we can do. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for the commitment you have to the work. And again, a final thanks to our panelists, Ophra Wolf, Mark Ruffalo, and Rob Bilott. I wish you all a great evening and much success in your advocacy. Good night, everybody.